Hi, this is Dr. Alana James, and this is actually Let's Get Published 3. I see that I didn't change my number on the first slide, but this is the third of the Let's Get Published series, and today we're looking at the outlines that developed from use of a model that came from a journal that we think we're going to write to. It's a little bit like a nursery rhyme that used to get quoted when I was a kid about, here's the house that Jack built, here's the publication we're building. We started by finding where we wanted to go, where we thought our ideas would land well by finding a journal. That was the first session. The second session was then, okay, now what we've got the pieces, how do we move from the pieces to our own writing? And that's done through finding models. And then today, we're well on our way with how we use those models to step into our writing. And that is always full of tensions. It's the point, you're not actually writing yet, so you don't have the power behind you of that you're liking what you're flowing, or you're frustrated with your words, or something kind of specific. You're caught in the overweb of what do I want to say, and am I really good enough to say it, and how am I going to put it together? So today is a very important day. Let's move it forward. The quote, again, I'm going to just drill into Zinsser because this is the best book on writing. And he says, very apropos to today, that writing is learned by imitation. If anyone asked me how I learned to write, I'd say I learned by reading the men and women who were doing the kind of writing I wanted to do and trying to figure out how they did it. So that's exactly where we are. And these are from a set of slides that I put in. I gave you the citation of that you can find on SlideShare, where he's pulled out some of Zinsser's best quotes. So our goal, ongoing goal, is that by August, we'll have something ready to go off to a publisher of our choice. The goal for today is to discuss funneling your reader to your takeaway thought. So last time we discussed a little bit of focus. What is it? What's the single thing we want to say? What's the takeaway we want our reader to have? And then today we're going to talk about funneling to that. Now, we'll also share a few quick tricks with Microsoft Word and Excel in case they're helpful and you haven't heard them before. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about this process. I realize every time I come to these slides, as you know, I'm working the process myself with something I want to get published, so that in between every exercise, I'm able to send out examples of how I fulfilled, how I understood my exercise to be. And as a published author, I feel like, oh, I have this, I know how to do this. And then as a writer, I'm up against the same insecurities that all writers are up against about, am I doing it well enough? Am I hitting my own target? And that's especially true when it comes to reminding myself of the single target I want my reader to have, and of reminding myself of my reader. And this is a tension I find whether I'm marketing or I'm speaking to an audience or I'm writing. All three of those are from me to someone who I know somewhat well. And it really pins it. It's really good when I keep them in mind the most. And it is so hard to do because when we're sitting by ourselves in our room with our keyboard, we it's hard to imagine the people we're writing to. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm going to keep saying these things, and they will always be attention. Still attention for me, 25 years a writer. Of course, it's attention for anybody who's just stepping off for the first time towards publication. So our agenda today is to overview the homework. We have a couple of things we can look at with that. A discussion, there's some questions that came in with the homework, so we'll answer those. And then we'll discuss, by looking at the homework, we'll discuss this idea of funneling the reader. And taking us back to the single point, looking at headings, do they get to the single point? And the point you take, how are the transitions working their way in? And then the homework is to begin to write. So it's to take this outline that you've developed, to look at it again in light of today's conversation, and then do next week is a couple pages, or next time, which is actually 3 weeks from now, is a couple of pages of writing. Once again, I'm reminding you that it's all about your reader. It's not just about you. So let's take a second before we look at the homework, which, by the way, if you haven't pulled it down, are in the handouts. Oh, and let me first address, before I even do that, let me address the 2 questions that came in. Question number 1, when is it plagiarizing to use a model? And I want to remind us that plagiarism is not about the style. It is about the content. So you can have 2 reports, to journal articles, to research scientific articles, and they will follow very similar patterns of thought, partially in the scientific world because we are trained to think in a certain pattern of thought. So we write to it, so our readers expect it. You can even drill down into, gee, I like that phrase. I like the way those people put that together. Their first paragraph does exactly what I want my first paragraph to do. So I'm going to pull out some sentence stems or some word usage because it works for me. And in your first draft, that's all fine, because what you're doing is getting ideas down on paper. It's like if you were an artist on a canvas, it would be your sketch. Then the work becomes your work. And you can expect to rework this document 4 or 5 times at a minimum from beginning to end before it's done. And you put your model aside once you get what you like about it down in your document. So it becomes less and less their ideas and more your way of talking as you read out loud, as you change the sentences, as you make it your voice. So the rest of the process runs. Most of the time, you're going to be using models that aren't even necessarily talking about the same thing you're talking about. So in that sense, there's no chance of plagiarism at all. It's your voice will come out. And as an author, that's what you want. You want your voice. You don't want it to sound like anybody else's ideas or thoughts or anything. So not to worry. If you have any question about it, all you have to do is run your document through one of many free plagiarism checkers to see whether or not they find any instances. But the purpose of the model is to give you the foundational pieces. The ladder will go up. It also is to give you a sense of what the editors of this journal are looking for. So if you base, it's as though you were going to enter your artwork in a show, and you knew the judges of that show a little bit, and you knew that they really liked bright colors. So this time you decided to make your palette bright in the hopes of attracting them. It's that kind of thing. Still your palette, still your color choices, still your painting, but you're massaging it. Do we need to change the section titles to our own? I would put a comment by them questioning that. And then as you write and rewrite, it's quite likely that the section titles will change as you massage the title to what you're actually saying. So, good questions, really good questions. Now, let's talk also about this tension that comes up. And I'll tell you my story on this. I was writing and my documents are in the handouts if you want to take a look. But I was writing for a particular journal that had published 3 different articles that were focused on this concept of a fully functioning university. Now I want to play out how those previous ideas might play out in a fully functioning graduate school environment or not. And I'm actually knowing that I'm going to spin their ideas into the modern world and bring in some technology questions, because I think that it's important that we start talking about how technology impacts our work in higher education. So I took their headings and I worked it, and I immediately found places where I was going my own direction. Well, then I got a little nervous and I went back to the guidelines. So I included those in the handouts just to point out that when in doubt, you're writing for the editor and the editor is responsible to the guidelines. So if you're not sure, if your piece has morphed some and you're not sure if it still fits this journal or how to make it better fit this journal, then how to bring your reader, which is this journal, into play, go back to your guidelines. Because you'll see in the guidelines I put up that they wanted 3 things. They want a discussion of what's happening and how it can happen and how that might change policy, that I just remember off the top of my head. So I used those headings to also continue to spin out my outline. And I realized when I turned it in to all of you as something to consider, that I think the second half of it is quite wobbly. I imagine that as I begin to write, the first half I think I can be pretty comfortable with, but I don't actually yet know what I'm going to say in the second half. That's okay. Keep writing, keep thinking, keep pushing. Wobbly is a term that I've always used about my writing. There are just times when it wobbles. I know it wobbles. Instinctively, I know it's not right. I'll turn it into my friends who help edit and work with me, and they're my peer review, and they'll tell me this part didn't make sense, and I'm never surprised. So it's okay if right now you're not sure exactly what you're going to say or how you're going to say it, and you're afraid of wobbles. Part of writing is figuring out what we want to say. I hope all that's useful to you. Let's look at some homework. So keeping your readers in mind looks like this. And this is what we're going to look at as we look at the funneling system today. And we're going to use the one that is titled 2017-0707 Homework Session 3. So you can pull that open on your screen and you can keep this funnel in mind. The first section, by keeping your readers in mind, you want to think about what is important to them, what is convincing to them, what will motivate them so they then find it provocative, how do they define rigorous, and at the end of the day, what do they think of as academic. The last one encompasses your voice. So we'll leave it aside for a minute. The first ones get to the question of this funnel. So looking at the homework, 2170-707, introduction. This is going to be open with the introducing the initial study by Fowler and explain why this author's version is important or relevant. Great. Okay, so that introduces the problem, and it probably moves us down the funnel into the convincing section, because there are the editors of this journal that we're playing off of. So that's a good beginning. Now let's go further. The multi-criteria approach to decommissioning, opening with describing what a multi-criteria decision approach is. And so that's probably, depending on the field, when we play back to things other people already know, it's an interesting challenge. I used to write a lot to action research journals. And I stopped writing to them because I found them too boring. And the reason I found them boring is because action researchers are always telling people what action research is. So, so be conscious of your reader and how much they need to know. But do give your reader who's never done this before enough. So that's a challenge that we all get to play with, that when we talk about our literature. Describes what a decision matrix is, justifies the decommissioning options, identifies why this is the most important component. So there's some tension in that identification because others might think other components are important. So we're getting to the interesting, convincing, motivating part of the keeping the reader in mind. Explains the scoring process, identifies the best performing overall, and explains a basic understanding of how sensitive overall performance evaluations are and varying criteria weighting. And yeah, performance evaluation, off the top as a reader, I think, so who is the reader of this journal? And is one of the most motivating factors for them increasing the sensitivity of performance evaluation? So, because in a lot of fields, that is a motivation for reading something. So you should know what's the motivation for your readership, and then you think through this whole multi-criteria approach. We don't know yet how long it's going to be. Is this a few paragraphs? This is a long part. But we think to ourselves, well, we want to be, this section should be moving our reader to the fact that it's important. We should be convincing our reader this is a topic to look at, and there should be leaving this section with some idea about what's motivating to them. You know your reader, you know your subject. I can't speak to that, but so far it's looking within tolerance, and there's a little bit of hesitation about how long this might be. Would it become what I call a sleeper section, where people who really know a field dash through it and they miss some important parts because they aren't reading seriously? So then you move on to implementing the approach, expert opinions, explain similar context, and now this author is into her own story. Now, this is actually perhaps a very intriguing part of our writing, and there's a lot to be. This will depend on the journal, and it'll depend on our topic. But as I overview the changes I'm seeing in academic writing over the last 15 years, storytelling is a significant movement within that change. So if you are literally, notice that on this outline, the author has moved to I. And that may be actually quite an excellent piece. He could be telling the story directly, or not. So it's a decision to be made, and that decision depends on the reader. If you are writing for a journal and you want to tell a story and you're comfortable with it being in your own voice, you will get more readers. It will be more viral. Those things are very useful. And part of what will happen after you publish is that you will, how do I put this? You will market your own writing, because there's so many journals in the world. Getting cited is a whole second issue, and I intend to cover it the last of our sessions. But you will get cited more if it reads more personably. Whether or not, though, your journal can take it is another question. So it may not be in your model. You may have to go seriously look through that journal and articles and see when people use first person or not. So thank you for bringing that up, because it's a good thing to think about. Now then, this is the more rigorous section. If rigor is a analysis point for this journal, it isn't for the journal I'm writing to, because the journal I'm writing to is more concerned with new ideas, and so rigor and new ideas are sometimes at odds to each other. But so you have to do, it depends a lot on what kind of journal you're writing. But if this is then for a scientific journal, then this section needs to be rigorous. And how do we be rigorous? There is no such thing as too much specificity with rigor. So on the other hand, the trouble with specificity is it takes a lot of room. So then you have to massage back and forth as you write to get it to be the right size, to get each section to be the right size. And then we look at this and we see that this author and I had the same kind of issue. When I see DVDs, I think, oh, there we have some wobbliness. We don't quite know exactly where we're going. And we are taking our reader to a call to action. So to some extent, we are on dangerous ground if we write the top part of our funnel before we are crystal clear where we're taking the reader. Now, the only danger we're in is that we're going to rewrite the thing dozens of times instead of a few. It'll get there eventually. Going back and forth through this funnel is very, very useful. And you can change what the funnel says. So I set this one up for basic scientific results, but you can also aim your reader in different directions depending on if it's a policy journal. You might have examples and different things instead of methods, etc. So feel free to make your own funnels. Feel free to analyze your stuff in lieu of them. Let me go back now to the room to say what questions have come up as a result of my going through this example. Any? Tell me yes or no, and comments, please. And then we'll go on to take a quick look. This is always dangerous, but I'll take a quick look at whether or not the one I sent out in between times matches this criteria. So, people in the room, what have you got to say? And as they're typing, I will open up the other. When you create your own funnel, or stick to the model. Yes. When do you do each? it's when you know your call to action really well, Nikki. Your call to action is different than your model's call to action. That goes without saying, because you're not reproducing what they did. You're using their writing as a model. So you use their model until you know your call to action perfectly. And then you redo it. You think to yourself, well, is the way this is currently plotted going to get me there? Another thing I just want to say is to have a lot of freedom with yourself, and hope that you have other people who are working with you. Have a lot of freedom to make really big mistakes. So I just finished a piece, and actually I'm willing to put it up in the handouts. I just finished a piece that actually is just getting published now. Bear with me a second. I'll pull it up and you can see it. And it really did not know what my call to action was. Knew I was on to something, and then worked with someone else who shares my ideas about this topic. It's called Digital Intelligence for Postgraduate Schools. And what happened was I used a model from a Forrester report about developing digital intelligence, and they write for businesses. And I used their format, worked for me, and it was a good white paper, and I just kind of rewrote them to my thoughts about postgraduate schools needing to have this overarching idea about digital intelligence, because they're a place that they're in right now is they're buying technology, our technology included, but they don't have it well sorted out together. So that's what I wanted to go for. And I sent it off to my friend who's a provost, and he started to ask me questions, and he added things, and they were good things. In the middle of this piece, it was so wobbly, I had no idea what I was saying. So I came back to say, what is it I want to say? And I threw it into a funnel, and at the end it worked. But my story is just to say, this process, if you are doing a rigorous piece of research, you will have this. You will have your literature, you'll have your method, you'll have your results, and instead of a call to action, you'll have your discussion, and that is done, and that's the easiest kind of journal writing there is. It is a mini dissertation or thesis. It follows the same pattern. But for those of us who play with ideas and the importance of moving our fields forward, it gets mushier and mushier how we go. So that's okay. We'll get used to it. We'll keep writing, and that's our answer. Okay, so now I'm looking for something. Let me go on. Anything else as a discussion point? Let me go back to your chats and see, trying to figure out how the sections fit into the model of literature methods. I think this exists, but it's not named that way specifically. Is that okay? Yes. In fact, you will know right away when every piece of academic writing needs to be based upon, it needs to have foundation in the literature of our field. We just don't go anywhere without our lit traveling with us. So when we're talking about significance, sometimes the significance is our literature, and sometimes, so it's not always called literature. It's often called all kinds of other things. And methods is really boils down to, this is a really good question, Elena, because you're really drilling into what are these things to our reader. So to our reader, our literature is the basis, how this work, these ideas fits into the broader field. To our reader, methods are, where did we get these thoughts? And how are they connected back to the rest of the world so that they might be tested? And your story is your methods section, perhaps. So the story of I went from here to here to here to here is in fact telling your reader how you got there. Maybe. Is that helpful? And you don't need to use those actual words, but if you are writing to a scientific journal and you see those words a lot, then use them. I'm going to talk about abstracts in August. I have a webinar coming up on abstracts. And the thing about abstracts is that within some parts of our scientific world, there is a set 7-sentence abstract structure and everybody uses it. And the rest of us can play off of that structure should we choose to. So that's how it is with writing academically. We're all based in a scientific place, and how much our field, our particular part of our field, makes us dip in specifically to those words depends on where we sit. But I see it all as a continuum. All right, apologies. Now I have to open up this document again. And of course, I opened the wrong one. You don't know how much writing you do until you try to find something quickly. Here we go. And of course, it's not opening. Well, actually, we're kind of, we may not have this. Let me see what, I got the handouts done. Let me finish up golden threads. Is there a theme or golden thread through your ideas? I'll let the two people in the room think about that. Can you say yes or no? Can you write it in a sentence? Is there one, and that's what a call to action is there one takeaway you want your reader to have? Raise your hand if you're in the room if you say there is, if you're clear on what that is. 50%. Excellent. So, and that's about what writing is like. We may go into writing with it clear and we may not. What if you go into it and it's not clear, just know your writing's going to take a little longer. Are you led through each heading and through the headings to the conclusion? And that's what you need to look at. That's what essentially what I was doing with the funnel today with the work that was turned in. And is there a clear set of endings as a call to action? So your next steps are going to be using this model of critical analysis of what was published before yours and using your funnel. So going back, as you begin to write, critically analyze your model. So go back and look, and this is prior to writing. So now you've got your outline. You're going to take off. You're going to put your own ideas down. That's great. But a little bit more critical analysis is useful. How did they transition from one thing to another? Can you use those tricks? Is their language approachable? Can you mimic it or not mimic it, but is your natural tendency to write at that same level? Is their language not approachable because it's really very academic? Are you comfortable with that? And what are you going to have to do to get there? Are there bits in their writing you find ponderous? Like, was there a section, honestly, in their article or the articles you read from this journal that put you to sleep? Be aware of that. And it's okay to judge the other authors and say, you know, this section I found long. I skipped over it. What made that happen? And how can I avoid it? And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. For every hour you give to reading and analyzing the works of others, you're going to save your own 2 or 3 times. Back to what Zinzer said at the beginning. Okay, so you've built your outline. and you can start writing. And if you run into difficulty after the 29th of July, you can go to, you can add Doctoral Net on your Skype accounts and put sections of writing up and get quick feedback. So the part about writing is that it's useful to have someone else that we play off of. With the story I told in the piece I just finished, every time he played off of it, I was thrown into a big change. I kept having to apologize that I didn't quite know where I was going, but our ideas meshed well, and at the end it worked out really well. So those are the sessions. Are there questions? People may be typing, yes, trying to figure out, no, that's the last thing. Raise your hand if you have a question. And yes, go ahead, Elena. You're typing, I'm assuming, which good. It gives me a chance to see if I can find this homework piece that isn't coming up. There it is. Yes, finally. I think. There we go. Elena, are you typing? It hasn't come through yet if you are. Let me see if it's stuck. Nope, it's not stuck. Oh, maybe it's not, maybe I didn't answer the full question that was there. I have tremendous difficulty getting data for this chapter. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, apologies, new question. Do I decide that in detail? Do I describe it in detail in the methods? Well, I don't know that researchers ever say we had tremendous difficulty doing anything, but we do always be transparent with the challenges that we face. So if you have, so how to say that? Caveat is that these are based on small data, small amounts of data due to X, Y, and Z. The protocol is transparency. And they will, your reviewers, remember everything you write is written for will be reviewed, and your reviewer's job is to sniff out lack of transparency or lack of rigor where it's needed. So that's a whole nother thing. It's what you do with the reviewers' comments once you get them. I do want to look for a second. We've got 10 minutes, and I finally got the, and I wanted to point a couple of things. Notice it's a different piece of paper. And the reason for that is that when I did guidelines for writing from my journal, this is the size piece of paper, and these are the way headings are set, that they recommend that your final document comes into. So it occurred to me that how something goes and when you feel like it's not too long has a lot to do with paper. This pushes down. Okay, if I was on the right side, so that's why I made those changes. I also go through it so much I like with the my analysis here. It's always good. So I set up the problem and the introduction and the significance through the three-part previous articles. The first one, which you thought was about fully functioning in 2008, that went across the things that were talked about in the first article, and that's how I got that table. I see things in tables, so that'll be filled in the things from the first article and the things from the second article. And then the most recent article in 2016 actually focused on just one of these, what will become the columns in the table. So my introduction not only lays it out, but lays out the three ways that it was put together, and it builds on the literature specifically for that. Now I'm going to go into the parts that are a little, are getting towards the wobble, because the guidelines said that it was they wanted to conceptualize. They wanted to publish things that conceptualize new kinds of education, new things, new growth things in higher education. So I'm conceptualizing a fully functioning postgraduate school, and then I take that through what the first article said, and I ask the question of why are these things important? Well, they're important because technology is changing how we do these things. Universities are being pushed by graduate bodies to do more or less, and all of this has to be done with more financial constraints. So I hope that this is motivating. I'm not sure I've actually pinned the convincing part yet, but that's where I think the wobble is. Then I'm really getting to wobble, because what I don't know is what my call to action is. So I've got some methods. I've got a story. In this case, the 45 students in the program, and the vision of how technology actually helps being student-centered across these other things, but it's not clearly going down the funnel correctly. And I have some results. There's a couple universities who are using these kind of strategies. I don't know that they consider themselves fully functioning or not, but I thought I could get with them, and they might have some quotes. They might not be, they might think it was interesting to be mentioned. And I don't have a call to action. So it is useful. The couple of reasons to bring this up. It is useful to look at your guidelines right away and to start putting your headings and your margins and everything to them, because it'll save you a lot less time when you're writing than it does at the end when you have to go back and redo everything. And it is really useful to know where your wobbles are, because I can't go further. I should not go further. It would be really tempting to start writing some of these sections, but until I've got a much more grounded article, I'm only wasting my time. Another question has come in. When we begin writing, what sections do you start with? Either the section that's going to be the hardest for you, or the section that's going to be the easiest for you. It doesn't really matter. You're going to write, I tend to start at the beginning and write onwards, but I tell you right now, there's a challenge with that. You tend to have a much more firmly crafted beginning than you have ending. And if you do what I do, which you can see in this analysis, to get to kind of a wobbling ending, it's probably better if I start by figuring it out and then writing my ending. I might get the whole thing done faster. So These are the things we learn as we go along, and there are no rights and wrongs. We've got 4 minutes left. For the people in the room, on a scale of 1 to 5, how helpful has today been? CTA stands for call to action, and it implies that you want something out of this. You want your reader to do what? You want them to take your ideas into their own field. You want them to post your article on LinkedIn because they found it so. You want them to whatever. And you might not say that directly, but it's useful to have that in your mind as the point you're going for. I want my readers to take actions. I want them to consider these ideas and move them into their own workspace because I think they're good leadership ideas. So I have that in mind. It's the stuff in the middle that wobbles. What else? Scale of 1 to 5, how useful was today? Excellent. And what would you say if you were telling someone else, what would you say was the takeaway you remember most? Nikki says she still feels confused, but hope when I start to write, I will understand the process better. I'm attempting a discussion piece rather than a research piece and not sure of how to adapt it. Nikki, I was told once when I was in the part of my career that I was an artist, I was told that the hardest thing for an artist is a blank canvas. So write and then fit to someone else and let someone else tell you where it does or doesn't go. That's the way to get past that particular piece. And confusion is something that you won't use that word probably as you write more. It feels confusing our first time through. It feels like it's just, oh, that tension again after we've written a lot. It's a common. In fact, probably always we have tensions about how we're going and whether we're going to get quite where we want to go when we start. Convincing the reader of significance is a very important takeaway. And you do that through those keeping your reader in mind. Excellent. Thank you both for coming. Thanks to the people who are watching by recording. We're getting more and more lurkers in this group, which is just fine. These sessions will go on and become part of a course. So delighted to anyone who is listening at whatever time, and we hope they were useful. If you have any questions, write Margie, M-A-R-G-I-E, at doctoralnet.com, and she will help find you resources for things that remain confusing. Take care now.